February 1979. 400 People's Liberation Army tanks cross into northern Vietnam. Most are Type 62 tanks, weighing 21 tons, with 35 millimeters of frontal armor, and crewed by men with fewer than 100 hours behind the controls. In the limestone passes ahead, rocket-propelled grenade teams wait with warheads rated to burn through 260. That mismatch is where this story starts. But the armor was only the first thing that had been hollowed out. The Type 62 rolled off the line as a stripped-down answer to a problem of geography. At just 21 tons, it was half the weight of the People's Liberation Army's mainstay Type 59, light enough to cross rice paddies and rickety bridges in China's southern provinces. Its hull front carried a mere 35 millimeters of rolled steel, with the sides thinning to 15. The turret offered a maximum of 50 millimeters, but only on the face, and the flanks and rear were left exposed. The main gun was an 85 millimeter Type 62 85TC, derived from Soviet patterns, firing a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive anti-tank rounds from a cramped turret basket. Ammunition stowage wrapped around the turret floor, with little separation from the crew or the fuel tanks. There was no gun stabilizer. Fire control relied solely on a basic optical sight. There was no rangefinder, no ballistic computer, no night vision, and no nuclear, biological, and chemical protection. The loader's escape route was through the commander's cupola, a design that would prove fatal under fire. The entire package was a compromise: mobility over protection, speed over firepower, simplicity over survivability. On paper, it was a tank for border skirmishes and infantry support, not for slugging it out in a modern anti-tank environment. Every trade-off was a gamble, and every omission would become a liability once the shooting started in the limestone gorges ahead. By 1979, the People's Liberation Army's armored core was a shell of its former self. 10 years of cultural revolution had gutted the officer ranks. Records show that nearly 30% of senior armor commanders were purged and replaced by men chosen for political reliability, not tactical skill. The armored school at Luoyang spent most of the decade shuttered, with technical courses suspended and instructor cadres sent to labor farms. When the doors reopened, the pipeline of new officers was a trickle, and graduation rates dropped to less than a fifth of their level before 1966. Promotion boards weighed party loyalty above gunnery scores, pushing out experienced tankers and elevating commissars with little field experience. The effects filtered down to the crews. Training ledgers from the 38th Group Army revealed that by the late 70s, the average tank crew logged fewer than 100 hours behind the controls, less than a third of the standard before the purges. Gunnery drills became rare, live ammunition was rationed, and maintenance cycles stretched thin as the stock of skilled mechanics evaporated. Depot logs from 1977 show a backlog of 850 overdue service hours per tank, with only 55% of the fleet declared operational on the eve of the invasion. In the north, the numbers were even worse. Ammunition shortfalls and chronic parts shortages left entire companies grounded. The result was a force sent into combat with untested officers, undertrained crews, and half its machines barely fit for the road. The institutional rot was invisible on parade, but it would become unmistakable once the columns crossed into Vietnam's limestone valleys. Orders landed with the weight of a political clock. On February 17, 1979, more than 200,000 People's Liberation Army troops and roughly 400 tanks surged across the border under Deng Xiaoping's direct authority. The stated objectives were blunt: seize the provincial capitals of Chao Bang, Lao Cai, and Lang Son, then withdraw before international pressure could mount. The operation's timetable was dictated from Beijing, not the battlefield. Armored columns were pushed forward on a compressed schedule, leaving little room for reconnaissance or adaptation. Operational orders specified a rapid advance and a fixed pull-out, with no provisions for a drawn-out fight or reinforcement if resistance stiffened. The force structure was built for shock, mass infantry backed by light armor rather than for sustained combined arms maneuver. Every hour counted against a withdrawal deadline. This imposed urgency filtered down to regimental commanders who were told to keep moving, regardless of logistical strain or mounting casualties. The result was a campaign shaped by political imperatives, not battlefield realities, committing underprepared crews and vulnerable machines to a hostile environment that would exploit every flaw in the system. Elevation profiles of the Chaobang and Dongdang corridors reveal a battlefield shaped by geology, not by doctrine. The limestone karst landscape rises in abrupt ridges and falls away into narrow valleys, slicing the terrain into a series of bottlenecks. People's Liberation Army route planners, working from outdated topographic maps, funneled Type 62 columns into single-file advances along roads that clung to the base of cliffs or snaked through defiles less than 5 meters wide. Here, the tank's supposed mobility became a trap. The torsion bar suspension, calibrated for the soft mud of rice paddies, struggled on loose limestone scree. Ground pressure, measured at nearly 0.95 kilograms per square centimeter, meant that even a short rain turned the scree into a bog, immobilizing vehicles and exposing them to direct fire. GIS overlays from the period show that every pass north of Lang Son offered only 1 or 2 navigable tracks, each easily pre-registered by Vietnamese forces. The geometry of the terrain dictated the flow of armor. No flanking, no dispersal, no escape from a mined choke point. The Type 62's low silhouette and narrow hull, designed for stealth and agility in open country, now forced crews to advance in predictable, tight columns, perfect targets for ambush teams waiting above the kill zone. Each kilometer forward increased the risk that a single immobilized tank would block the entire route, trapping the column in a place where neither armor nor doctrine could compensate for the landscape's veto. Pressure plate mines, buried at the narrowest choke points, waited for the lead tank's weight. A single detonation sheared the track or snapped a suspension arm, locking the entire column behind a crippled hull. Vietnamese ambush squads, already zeroed in from the ridgeline, opened fire with RPG-7 and Chinese-made Type 69 launchers. The PG-75L warhead, with a shaped charge rated at 260 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor penetration, struck steel that was only 35 millimeters thick at its strongest point. The blast punched straight through the hull or turret ring, sending molten metal and pressure waves through the crew compartment. A well-placed shot to the turret ring disabled the traverse and jammed the only escape route for the loader. Hits to the engine deck ignited fuel lines and set off ammunition stored just beneath the floor. In the confined space, a cook-off meant fire and toxic smoke in seconds. Crews had no automatic fire suppression, only a manual extinguisher with a 30-second charge. It was useless if the turret was breached or if the loader was trapped. The kill chain was mechanical and methodical. Mine, immobilization, RPG, penetration, then fire. Vietnamese squads moved with practiced efficiency, often using captured Chinese manuals to select aim points. The result was not just the destruction of hardware, but the systematic dissection of a column. Each tank lost became an obstacle for the next, compounding the damage with every minute the ambush held. Chinese RPG-7s, shipped south in the thousands during the Vietnam War, returned north in the hands of Vietnamese regional forces. Serial numbers on launchers and PG-7VL warheads recovered from ambush sites near Cao Bang traced directly to Chinese export batches from Factory 636. Captured People's Liberation Army manuals, annotated in Vietnamese, were found among the bunkers overlooking the kill zones. Proof that crews on both sides had studied the same diagrams, learned the same weak points, and drilled on the same turret silhouettes. Vietnamese squads aimed for the turret ring, just as the manuals advised, knowing a single shaped charge would shear the traverse and wedge the loader's only escape. The loader's hatch, never more than a borrowed feature from Soviet blueprints, required him to crawl past the commander's cupola to get out. In the chaos of a hit, when a jet of molten copper cut through 35 millimeters of steel, seconds mattered. A direct strike triggered an ammunition cook-off. Propellant bags ignited, the turret filled with fire and carbon monoxide, and the manual extinguisher's 30-second charge was useless if the loader was trapped. Survivors described pounding on the hatch as flames licked around their boots, while the commander, blinded by smoke, tried to force open a cupola warped by the blast. The bitter symmetry was unmistakable. Chinese tanks designed for southern rice paddies destroyed by Chinese-made weapons, wielded with Chinese doctrine, on Vietnamese ridgelines. Each loss was more than a tactical failure. It was a closed loop of institutional self-destruction, recorded in the crew rosters and the after-action reports that Beijing would later seal away. Official Chinese records list 37 Type 62 tanks as irreparable losses from the 1979 campaign, a figure repeated in post-war summaries and internal reports. Western estimates, built from satellite imagery, intercepted radio traffic, and on-the-ground wreck counts, range from 200 to 400 Chinese armored vehicles lost across all types. Battlefield photographs from Cao Bang, Lang Son, and Dong Dang show burned-out hulls and abandoned chassis tagged by Vietnamese units, with some sites documenting entire companies destroyed in single ambushes. The difference lies in definitions. Beijing counted only total write-offs, omitting vehicles abandoned under fire or later recovered. Western analysts aggregated every tank left disabled or captured on the field, regardless of repair status. The result is a loss ledger shaped by concealment, one set of numbers for the archives, another for the battlefield. The PLA's classified after-action report catalogued the failures in stark, technical language. It described armor that could not withstand even obsolete anti-tank rounds. It recorded crew proficiency levels well below minimum operational standards. Training cycles had been disrupted for a decade, with officers promoted for politics over skill. Logistics chains stalled under pressure, leaving tank units short on ammunition and spare parts in the middle of combat. The report's conclusions were unambiguous. The Type 62's losses were not the fault of hardware alone, but of a system that had hollowed itself out. Within months, Beijing reopened the armored academies, rewrote training manuals, and began restructuring tank regiments into combined arms brigades. The disaster in Vietnam became the blueprint for modernization, driven by the data of its own defeat. After Vietnam, the Type 62 faded from the front lines but did not vanish. The People's Liberation Army kept it in reserve and internal security roles for decades, with some units remaining on the books until around 2013. China exported the Type 62 to a handful of allies, North Korea, Albania, and Bangladesh, where it served in secondary duties or as a stopgap in low-intensity conflicts. Its continued presence in these settings reflected not battlefield prowess, but the reality of surplus hardware finding new homes as doctrine and technology moved on. The tank became an artifact of an era the PLA was determined to leave behind. Today, China fields tanks with composite armor, digital fire control, and crews drilled for combined arms. But institutional rot does not broadcast itself. It waits, silent, inside doctrine and training cycles. The Type 62's fate remains a standing order. Test everything under fire or repeat history in steel and bone.